Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Coming up today on The Story.
There were times where, I was truly asking, God, what are you doing? And he kept putting this verse on my heart. It was Philippians 4:6. Don't worry about anything, but in all your needs, ask God. And that verse kept coming up, and finally I just said, God, you've got to be kidding. Don't worry? I go, yeah, I want a different verse. I don't like this one.
The Story.
G'day, I'm Jimmy Colefax. Welcome to The Story. Well, Dave Hampson's wife had just reached the 5-year mark of being cancer-free when they found their daughter on the floor of her room and unable to move. Dave had thought that his family was finally done with major health challenges when suddenly they were facing another one. Today, David will share what happened and how his faith was severely tested. Dave is chatting with Eric Scatterbo and his wife Jean, who are good friends with Dave, who's joining us from Eric's hometown of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Incidentally, Eric says Dave is one of the best storytellers he knows, and a little bit later on in today's program, we'll hear an inspiring story about the faith of Dave's grandmother. But first, Dave tells us about discovering his daughter.
We just passed the 5-year mark, which is kind of the, that's kind of the benchmark. If you get you go past 5 years and you're considered cancer-free. It's not a guarantee, but the doctors feel that, yes, you have been cured. Mm-hmm. And so we had just reached that mark. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we were, in March of this year, we were celebrating my wife's 40th birthday. And we had friends over, and it was a great night. And a little, it kind of coincided with 5 years of cancer-free. Mm-hmm. And so it was a real night of celebration. And we had our friends over, great night. We said goodbye to everyone, put our kids to bed, and everyone was fine. And about 2 hours later, our daughter, 11-year-old daughter, Emily, calls from the bedroom floor, and from her room, and she's on her floor, and she says she can't move her legs, and she has no feeling from her chest down. And, this is a perfectly healthy little girl.
Yes.
Never sick. Hours before, she was carrying her little sisters around, running. There was no indication. Well, we rushed her to one hospital, and they said, no, this is beyond what we can do. And so we took her by ambulance to another. And for the next 48 hours, she was subjected to one test after another, trying to determine what was going on with her.
Yes. Yes.
And it turns out it was something called idiopathic transverse myelitis, which is when your antibodies actually attack your spinal cord and it becomes inflamed. And it shuts down all the nerves and the signals. And it affects about 1.5 million people.
Wow.
So it's very unusual. And I can remember, one of the first tests was an MRI where they put us in this room, and it was a full body MRI. They slid her into this tube, and I couldn't get close to her. She couldn't hear me. And so, I just got in the corner, fell on me, and just prayed and prayed and prayed. And, my first thought was, God, we had cancer. Let someone else get it. We've always done our thing.
Yes.
It's someone else's turn.
Yes.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, we don't get two. Everyone else gets one first, then we get another one.
Yeah.
But, and then, so, it was, I don't think I've ever prayed that hard in my life. And, it's one thing when it's your spouse that's an adult.
Yes.
And it's a completely another when it's your child. And, you see them as being so vulnerable. And, they're just fragile. And yet, it turned out it was just the opposite as I watched my daughter go through this period of time.
How was Darcy through this?
She was as rock solid as could be.
Okay.
I mean, really was amazing. And it's one of these things where you don't have time to really think about what's going on. Your first priority is to your child and make sure they're okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you choose your moments to break down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, there were times where, I was truly asking, God, what are you doing?
Right.
Yes.
And as I prayed, I said, God, this would be a really good time to hear from you. First, I'm listening, and I'd really like to hear your word about now. It could be a whisper of, what do you have for me? And he kept putting this verse on my heart. It was Philippians 4:6. Don't worry about anything, but in all your needs, ask God.
Yes. Yes.
And I kept praying, I said, God, give me a verse, and that verse kept coming up. And finally I just said, God, you've got to be kidding. Don't worry.
Yeah.